Negotiators for the UK and the EU have spent the day in last-ditch talks to try to secure a post-Brexit trade deal. The head of the UK team, Lord Frost, said they were working very hard to reach an accord, although Ireland's Prime Minister said that things were on a knife edge. The UK left the EU at the beginning of the year, but the two sides have been talking for months now to try to agree a new trading relationship, which is due to start on January the 1st. Tonight, EU sources and Downing Street are making different claims on signs of progress over fishing rights. More on that in a moment. Two other main issues, competition rules and how a deal would be enforced, remain unresolved. Our political correspondent Chris Mason reports.
Back in Brussels, the UK's chief negotiator, Lord Frost, arriving for what's described on the British side as the last roll of the dice in trade talks with the EU.
We're working very hard to try and get a deal. We're going to see what happens in negotiations today, and we will be looking forward to meeting our European colleagues later on this afternoon. Thank you very much.
There is frustration in government at what is seen as the EU's failure to understand the importance of the UK's newfound independence.
We want to be doing a free trade agreement as a sovereign equal with the European Union, and so anything that undermines our ability to control our own waters, for instance, or undermines our ability to make our own laws isn't something we can accept.
5:30.
Tonight, EU sources suggest agreement could be near on fishing rights. The UK government source said there had been no such breakthrough, and the issue of fair competition and how any agreement is enforced remain sticking points. As Lord Frost arrived at the European Commission, he was reminded that the French are worried about not being able to catch as many fish.
Lord Frost, what's your message to Emmanuel Macron?
And supporters of the French government will tell anyone who'll listen they'll say no to a deal they don't like.
This is the framing of the relationship between the UK and the EU for years, decades to come. And so we have to be absolutely convinced on both sides of the channel that it is the right framing for this relationship. And if it is not, we shouldn't sign it.
If there is a deal, Parliament will be asked to endorse it. That's likely to be a formality given Boris Johnson's sizable majority. But Labour are divided about what to do. They regard no deal as a disaster, but can't agree whether it would be wise to endorse any deal the government does.
We'll have to look, of course, at the content of a deal, but also any legislation that comes to Parliament. We're not going to give them a blank cheque, but I think I have been very clear, both today and on previous programmes with you, Andrew, that the most important thing is that the government get a deal.
And tonight, on that big question, the likelihood of a deal, a big player in the drama of Brexit, the Irish Prime Minister, said this.
My gut instinct is that it's 50-50 right now, and I don't think one can be overly optimistic about a resolution emerging.
And so there is still plenty to discuss in Brussels after the rows, the anger and the bitterness of the last 4.5 years since the EU referendum. Another crucial moment of decision beckons. So the talks are on a knife edge, says the Irish Prime Minister, and Reeta, we have the two sides on the issue of fish seemingly not being able to agree on what they agree on. Meanwhile, tomorrow, worth keeping an eye here on Parliament, the return of the Internal Market Bill, a bit of legislation that could mean the UK breaches the last agreement it made with Brussels at just the point it's trying to negotiate the next one. And on the trade deal, both sides still want to do a deal if they can, and compromise has a habit of turning up fashionably late at negotiations, but it may not turn up at all, and in that instance we'd be looking at a no-deal Brexit 3 weeks on Friday.
Chris, thank you. Our political correspondent Chris Mason there. Well, as Chris was saying, there have been conflicting accounts over the past few days about where progress has or hasn't been made. But the main sticking points have been known for months. Our reality check correspondent Chris Morris looks at the main issues.
The final days of negotiation, and while fishing may be a tiny part of the economy on both sides of the Channel, it's of huge political importance. It was central to the Take Back Control message in the 2016 referendum. What's at stake now is access to these UK waters, where EU boats currently catch about £600 million worth of fish every year. The UK wants much of that back. So it's about the UK share of fishing quotas, not just where you can fish, but how much you can catch. There's also the timeline for measures coming into full force. The EU wants a status quo period of up to 10 years. The UK says it should be much shorter than that. The other main area of disagreement is the level playing field, rules on fair competition for billions of pounds of business now and in the future. The two sides are trying to agree a common baseline on workers' rights and the environmental regulations that companies have to follow. If you cut regulations, it can be cheaper to make stuff, and the EU is worried the UK could do that in the future. Then there's state aid or government subsidies for business. The UK is determined to assert its sovereignty, and it's refusing to follow EU rules. But the EU says it has to protect companies within its single market. So the third main area of disagreement, how you enforce a deal and resolve any disputes. The EU is demanding the right to retaliate if the UK breaks the rules in one area by hitting back in another, imposing tariffs or taxes, for example, where it thinks they might hurt the most. Then there's the question of who adjudicates any disputes and the potential role of the European Court of Justice. But in this final push for a deal, it's worth emphasising that even if an agreement is reached, there are big changes coming. New bureaucracy, checks and paperwork for traders and travellers crossing the border from January the 1st. A deal would remove some of them, including crucially tariffs on goods. But outside the single market and the customs union, things will be very different. The choice now, a pretty hard form of Brexit or no deal at all. Chris Morris, BBC News.
Let's speak to our Europe editor, Katya Adler, who's in Brussels for us. Katya, there is claim and counterclaim tonight about progress on fishing.
That's right. Look, I am hearing from some in the EU that the negotiators who've been hard at work in the European Commission building that you see just there behind me are nearing a deal on fish. This has been strongly denied in the UK. Now, that is confusing, Rita, but this kind of mixed messaging at 5 to midnight on a deal like this with so much at stake isn't exactly uncommon. What I'm also hearing is that on the two other outstanding issues we heard about there in Chris's report, the two sides are still very far apart. So the EU really does want to tie the UK to some kind of agreed fair competition principles, as it calls it, in exchange for good access to its single market. But the UK says after Brexit, it wants sovereignty. It wants to be free to be able to make up its own rules and regulations. And because there's little mutual trust, the EU is then saying, OK, well, we need to find a good way to enforce our agreement there to make sure that both sides stick to the rules or otherwise face pretty tough consequences. All of these issues will make or break this deal, Rita. We have another day of negotiations ahead of us and then another call between the Prime Minister and the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, to see where we are by then.
Katya, many thanks. Katya Adler there in Brussels.